In this episode of Ask Captain Chris, we'll introduce you to anchoring. We'll help you select the right anchor and scope for lunch, overnight, or just for fun.
Hi, I'm Captain Chris, and welcome to Anchoring. Come cruise along with us, and we'll show you how to anchor confidently, so that way you can anchor in the evenings, sleep comfortably overnight, and not have to worry about the boat dragging. Today we'll talk about the different types of anchors, the seafloor conditions, the actual anchor windlass or capstan, and the rode and the scope that you'll need to anchor your boat for lunch, for an overnight anchorage, or in case of storm conditions. We'll make it fun. We'll show you how. Let's talk about rode. A lot of times you hear a seasoned cruiser talk about rode, and you may think he was assuming to say rope. Well, rode is actually the connection of rope and or chain that connects the bow of the boat to the anchor on the seafloor. So rode can be 100% rope or 100% chain, or a combination of chain and rope. If it is a combination of chain and rope, it's usually understood that you want to have at least one boat length of chain, or possibly 2 boat lengths of chain, and then the balance would be rope. When you connect the chain to the rope, there's 2 ways of doing that. One is with a rope to chain splice, where you splice the rope directly into the chain. That way it will feed through the anchor windlass or capstan. And the older way is a rope with a thimble and then a shackle that connects the thimble of the rope to the chain link. Be sure when you put the shackle pin in that you mouse it down, or you seize it with seizing wire so the shackle pin does not rattle and unscrew. Scope. Scope is the ratio of the length of the anchor rode to the vertical distance from the bow roller on the boat to the seafloor on the bottom. There are 3 typical scope ratios: lunch, sleeping overnight, and for storm weather conditions. For lunch, obviously you don't want to put too much rode out, therefore you don't have to pull that much back in. We'll go with the scope of 5. For overnight conditions, you want to feel a little bit more secure. We'll go with the scope of 7. And in case of bad weather approaching, you may go to a scope of 10. When figuring your scope, or actually before you figure your scope to anchor the boat, let's do a little mental math process. How deep is the water? Big question. A lot of people have a boat where the depth gauge reads from the keel. Other people may have a depth gauge that reads from the waterline. With modern depth gauges or fathometers, there are offsets built into the software where you can adjust the readout on your dashboard. In our case, we like our fathometer or our depth gauge to read from the keel. So example, if my depth gauge says 2, that means there's 2 feet of clear water under the keel of my boat. Since my boat has a 4-foot draft, that means I'm floating in 6 feet of water. So let's get back to the idea of how deep is the water. My depth gauge reads 2. That's 2 feet under my keel. My boat draws 4 feet, so that means that the water is 6 feet deep. And now I have to figure in the amount of airspace between the water level and the bow roller on the anchor pulpit, which is another 6 feet. So now I've got 6 feet of water, and I have 6 feet of airspace, so that means there's a grand total of 12 feet from my bow roller down to the seafloor. Now we're working with 12 feet from the bow roller to the seafloor, and the question now becomes, are we going to stop for lunch, which would be a scope or ratio of 5 times 12, we would put out 60 feet of rode. Or if we're going to anchor overnight, we'd do a scope of 7, so we would do 7 times 12, 84 feet of rode. Or If a storm is coming or in the weather forecast for the evening, we may go to a scope of 10, which would be 120 feet of anchor road deployed overboard. Now you can see the importance of knowing the water depth and the airspace from the water line to the bow roller, so you can plan on your scope and your anchor road for a lunch anchorage, overnight, or for stormy conditions. But don't forget, what is the tide level? Are you anchoring right now at low tide or at high tide? Some things to consider. If you're anchoring at high tide and there's a 5-foot tide and you only have 2 feet of clear water under your boat, when the tide goes out, you guessed it, your boat's sitting in the mud. Or, the other hand, if you anchor at low tide and 5 feet of tide comes in, then you have to adjust your scope or your road length for the additional 5 feet of deeper water when that high tide occurs, which might be during the middle of the night while you're sleeping. Let's run through a different set of numbers. Say we're cruising the U.S. East Coast in Georgia. Georgia's got a 9-foot tide, so keep that in mind. And we find a nice little anchorage, and we're showing 6 feet of water under our keel. Our keel's 4 feet deep, so that means we've got 10 feet of water right now. There's 6 feet of airspace between the water level and our bow roller, so that's 16 feet. And then we have to plan for the higher tide sometime throughout the night while we're sleeping, so that's going to be an additional 9 feet, giving us a total of 25 feet from our bow roller to the seafloor at the highest tide, assumed to be during the night while we're sleeping. So, if we want to plan for a stormy weather condition of a scope of 10 times the distance from the bow roller to the seafloor at high tide, that means we'll need 250 feet of anchor road deployed. How much road do you have in your anchor locker? Can you safely anchor here this evening? Do you have 250 feet of road on board? Or should you look for a shallower anchorage or give it up and go find a marina to tie up for the evening? I'd like to review a couple of hand signals for the anchor handler on the bow of the boat. And let me make a correction. I'm not talking about little bitty hand signals, I'm talking about your entire arm. So let's use that as arm signals. Let's say that you've got the fortune to have a bow thruster in the boat, and we would like to use a bow thruster signal where you tap your hip to the right. That means bow thrust to the right, neutral. Bow thrust to the left, neutral. So you've got these arm signals: forward, forward right, neutral, forward left, neutral, reverse the boat, neutral, bow thrust right, neutral, bow thrust left, neutral. All the while, the anchor handler is giving these signals to the helmsman at the lower helm, in the pilot house, or on the fly bridge. There's no voice communications required. All of the signals are all you need to do to communicate to the person driving the boat, to take the boat over to the anchor there, over to the anchor there, or to back up in case you've run over the top of the anchor road, the anchor rope, or the anchor chain. So again, arm signals: forward right, neutral, forward left, neutral, reverse, neutral, bow thrust right, bow thrust left. And that's an easy communication between the anchor handler and the helmsman. Again, lower helm downstairs, pilot house helm, or up on the fly bridge.
And what if we're not paying attention?
And if they're up there reading the Reader's Digest or filing their fingernails, then you can get their attention by stomping on the deck with your heel. And in the fiberglass boat, that will carry out, resonate throughout the entire boat, and that will get their attention. So let's go cruising. On a windy day like today, you can see how important the arm signals are. Can't hear a word that's going on up on the bow, so the arm signals are important because you can see them. Here we go to the right, neutral, go forward, neutral, back up the boat a little bit, neutral, bow thrust to the right, neutral, bow thrust to the left, and neutral. Forward again to recover the anchor, neutral, a little bit more to the right, neutral, a little bit more to the right, neutral, bow thrust to the right, neutral. Now we've got the anchor up, the boat is yours. We're no longer secured to the bottom. This is a favorite anchoring location called Hole in the Wall near Vero Beach, Florida on the Intracoastal Waterway. As we approach, you can see I'm up on the bow, I'm the anchor handler, and Elise is operating the boat from the flybridge or the upper helm. As we glide into the anchorage, you can see we're passing a smaller fishing boat. Elise is watching the depth gauge to make sure that the water depths are good enough for our bigger boat. So we're just cruising in, trying to find a place to block the waves from the other boats in the Intracoastal Waterway. And I'm just sitting up there, just waiting and waiting and waiting until we get into the perfect spot that will allow us enough swing room throughout the night. So if there are any other boats that come into the anchorage during the evening, we will be properly spaced. Now you can see that sailboat's already anchored. He got there first. So we will go past him so we can find a comfortably deep enough spot and then have enough swing space so that we won't collide during the night when we have a tidal change or a wind change. You can see the boat slowing down a little bit more. And I turn around and look back up at the helm. Elise is reading the depth meter, the depth gauge, the bathymeter. And I motion to go forward a little bit more because my perspective on the bow might be different than her perspective from the flybridge. I just gave the neutral sign and we're still gliding forward. Now I give the reverse sign to stop our forward progress. You can see the boat slow down. Neutral again. And now I'm getting the anchor ready to deploy. Take it down to the water level. And I give the reverse sign again. This is the only way I can tell if the boat's actually moving backwards. Now you can see the chain has changed direction. The boat is going backwards, and I am deploying the anchor rod, the anchor chain in this case. Neutral sign. Again, the boat continues to drift aft. And now the rope is going overboard. And I'm deploying the rope part of our rod. Another neutral sign. And now I secure the anchor rope to the bow cleat. And you can see the rod pull tight and the anchor set on the seafloor bottom. What you last saw was me picking up a strange hose. This is our anti-chafing device. You can see the hose with the split down the middle. Ran it across a table saw. And when you have a rope rod going through your anchor roller, for time after time this rope rod may become chafed or worn, and to help save our rod and make it last a lot longer, we use this hose as our anti-chafing device. You can see I'm giving arm signals to move the boat forward, now neutral. I had to get some slack in the anchor line so I could slide my anti-chafing hose down over the rope rod. You can see I'm sliding it down, sliding it down. I'm using a small string to tie it around the capstan so it won't slide overboard. And then I'll go ahead and check the anchor line. Make sure everything's okay, and I give a reverse signal so we can pull the boat back again. And now neutral. We're using the reverse energy or the inertia to straighten out the anchor line. See, we're straightening out the line a little bit. And we're set. Where can you anchor? Check with cruising guides or charts. Plan in advance. Look at a nice protected cove like this. Or maybe look somewhere else that's protected from the weather outside of the Intracoastal Waterway Channel. And here's Hole in the Wall. We just anchored there a few moments ago. How do you know that the water's deep enough for you to anchor your boat? Besides charts, there are a lot of other excellent resources for anchoring. Active Captain and Cruiser's Net are both on the internet, but you need to have cellular connection to get onto those websites. If not, you may also want to use a Skipper Bob cruising guide or a waterway guide, other excellent sources of anchorages along the waterway. Let me show you how to use Skipper Bob's. This says anchorages along the Intracoastal Waterway. And now we're down in Florida at mile number 946.4. That means 946.4 miles below Norfolk, Virginia, which is mile 0. In the brackets, you can see 0.5. That's the expected tidal range at this anchorage. Next, you'll see Pine Island. That's the geographic island shown on the chart. And now in the parentheses, you'll see these numbers, 334231. Look at the top where you see ARC, Anchor Rating Code, and that shows your holding, wind, current, wake, scenic beauty, and shopping. So now, understanding that 1 is bad and 4 is good, you can see that 3, holding's going to be pretty good here. Wind, a good protection from the wind area. 4, current, almost no current at all. So there's a lot of good things in this ARC Anchor Rating Code. And last, you can see number 1. There's no shopping because you're in the middle of nowhere. Earlier we talked about anchoring at Hole in the Wall. This is where we go. Hole in the Wall is just a lot more fun than saying Pine Island. Now to enter into this anchorage, read the paragraph and Skipper Bob will show you the proper approach to get into the deeper water. In addition to anchoring information, cruising guides can give you a lot of details about marinas. Would you need a marina with a restaurant, rental cars, any type of boat service, maybe a swimming pool, or how about laundry or boat stores or grocery stores nearby? So a cruising guide can help you with all of that. And don't forget, you also have a smartphone, so you can research the internet. If you'd like to order a cruising guide or an anchor guide, visit our webpage, Captain Chris Ships Store. You can order direct from the factory through this link. Now that you've selected an anchorage, let's go verify that conditions are acceptable for your size boat, your length of boat, and also the draft or the depth of your boat. On this split screen on the right, you can see Faber Cove is a cul-de-sac or dead-end cove, so no wind or waves can enter the cove. And on the left, you can see our GPS chart plotter with the icon for our boat moving into the cove, showing all the different docks from the homes in the neighborhood. Pay attention to the cookie crumbs or the snail trail behind the icon. you can see where our boat was. This will be important when we start to do the figure 8 so we can scout out the bottom contours. Looking at the top, we've got the depth gauge top left, and that is under keel. So at 6.1, 5.7 feet under our keel, our boat has a 4-foot draft. On the right, you can see it's 2:49 p.m. The bottom left, you can see our latitude and longitude, north and west numbers. And on the right, you can see we're doing 4.7 knots, which is actually pretty fast for scouting out the bottom. Pay attention to our depth. It's hovering in the 5-foot neighborhood, 6-foot neighborhood, and you can see that we're starting our figure 8. Now you can see the boat turning. More practically, you can see the chart is turning, and we're starting our left-hand turn to do the figure 8. See, our speed has slowed down, and our water depths are still fairly even at 6 feet, 5.5 feet, 6.5 feet. So all that's pretty uniform. We've started our figure 8, and soon we'll start a right-hand turn. Again, our depth is still pretty deep, 5 feet under keel, 4.7, 4.9 feet under keel, so we're doing really well with depth. And now we're coming back where we're crossing our figure 8, and this is the location that we would like to lower our anchor and then back down. One easy way to mark the anchor location is to press the man overboard button or set your anchor alarm. In this next photo, you can see where we've used the man overboard signal, MOB, which is also the code flag, yellow and red with a diagonal in the center. This is just the easiest way to mark where we've lowered the anchor, and then we can slide back downwind or downstream, down current, and set the anchor. So this way we can tell where the anchor is, and we can watch our breadcrumbs or our snail trails as we swing back and forth with the wind or the tide. This is a popular anchorage that we've returned to. Notice there's no man overboard flag, but there is waypoint number 0074. You can see the boat icon to the far top left of the screen, and you can see the snail trail back and forth and back and forth, and this is very much like the pendulum on a grandfather clock. So you can see that overnight our boat moved back and forth that much. You can see all of the snail trails zigzag back and forth, swing far to the left, swing far to the right, and looking in the top left corner you can see the other arrow with the N for north. So you can imagine that we've had northerly winds and easterly winds all night long. 9:15 at night, Elise and I are aboard a 53-foot trawler, 6-foot draft in Georgia, helping a couple take the boat home from Florida to North Carolina. You can see we've anchored with 9 feet of water under keel, and you can see some of our snail trail on the screen. Top right, you can see the radar showing the shorelines of the creek, and on the bottom right, you can see the aft-facing camera showing the flag. There's no wind this evening. 6:47 the next morning, you can see the snail trails exaggerated a lot more than it was last night. That proves how much the boat has moved with the tidal change in this creek. The top right, again you can see the radar, and the bottom right, we've changed the aft camera to the engine room camera so we can watch the owner of the boat go down and check the fluids on the engines, and that way he's never by himself. We can always monitor his progress. So now we pick up the anchor and we head north to North Carolina. Here we show a perfect example of why you want to scout out the bottom conditions using your boat and your depth gauge before settling in for the night. You can see we've done a loop-de-loop around the 20-foot mark on this chart. Problem is, it's only about 1 foot under keel. Elise and I are aboard a 47-foot trawler in this case. It's got a 6-foot draft, we're showing 1.1 feet under keel, and we don't even know if it's low tide yet. Speaking of tides, understand the tide tables are predictions. They're not guarantees. So when you look at your depth gauge, you need to know where in the tide cycle you are. Are you high tide, low tide, rising tide, or falling tide? And when you come into an anchorage, this is important to know so you can adjust your scope for the low tide or the high tide. Taking advantage of a lot of the features of a modern day GPS chart plotter, you can go to the tide chart feature, and here you can see the graphic on the right with the high tide, the low tide, and again the high tide. A lot more detail is on the left hand side of the chart plotter screen. This is a different brand GPS chart plotter, and again you can see the high tide, low tide, and high tide graphics with more information at the bottom of this screen. This paper chart is available free at most fuel docks. You have to learn how to use it because you have to add or subtract your exact location for the printed tide tables on this paper. So when you come into an anchorage to anchor for the evening, you need to understand what the tidal range is and where in the cycle you are. Are you rising or falling, or full high tide, or dead low tide? Now we're ready to anchor. We've checked the charts, we've run the figure eight, checked the depths, we know what the tidal range is, and we know we're going to be spending the night, so we'll do a 7-time scope. So how do we know how much road to play out? So you've done your calculations, and you figure that you have to deploy about 125 feet of road overboard. So as you're backing the boat down, the anchor is on the bottom, you feel it grab the bottom, and you keep on putting anchor road out, and more out. And looking at the angle on the road on the bow of the boat, there's not much of an angle. Because the chain is lying flat on the bottom, you cannot appreciate a diagonal angle. So, how much is overboard? What's the right amount that you need to deploy? Well, we said we needed 125 feet. Are we there yet? How about we mark the road? We've discovered that marking it in 25, 50, 75, and 100 foot increments makes it easiest to do mental math when you're on the bow of the boat. Do we know how much chain has been powered out overboard? Have you seen any colors yet? We like to use colors: red, white, blue, and gold. Every 25 feet we'll spray about 2 feet worth of chain for the solid color of red, solid color white, solid color blue, solid color gold. Gold being 1 century or 100 feet. So start by lowering your anchor onto the dock. Then stretch the chain out and measure it in 25 foot increments. If you're not in a boatyard, be considerate of your marina neighbors. We've tried using Visqueen, but we found spray painting in a box to be best because of the wind. Don't forget, try to paint about 2 foot sections so it'll be visible from the helm. Here's another option for an all rope road. Notice the colored ribbons twisted into the 3-strand rope. You've got a few reds, a few yellows, and a few greens. The problem here is you actually have to read the numbers printed on the colored ribbons. 30, 60, 90, then it goes to 120, then it goes to 1. You get my point? Mental math gets a little difficult. This chain is marked. Can you see where? Okay, now we'll run this much slower. See if you can find the markings. There, do you see it? This is why it's so important to have large, bright, visible markings about 2 feet long. You can see it from the bow, the helmsman can see it from the upper helm or the pilot house. This is why we like the 25-foot increments of red, white, blue, and gold. It's easy to figure, it's easy to see. On this old chain road, we've seen a band-aid approach to marking the chain. The boat owners actually used tie wraps. You can see them coming up out of the water. The first ones are pink, and the next ones to come up will be green. The only problem is, how far apart are they, and what value do they have as to how much chain is still overboard? After a good night's rest at anchor, it's time to pick up and head home. So now let's aim the boat over to the right so we can get a little slack on the anchor rope so we can pull our anti-chafing device off, that big white rubber hose, and then we'll start to retrieve the anchor. Untie the anchor line from the bow cleats, and notice all the slack that I'm working with. And I'm starting to pull in the slack and slide it down the hawser hole or the chain pipe, and then I'm giving arm signals for Elise to steer the boat more to the right. This way, instead of using the anchor windlass or capstan, I'm pulling in the rope by hand because she's driving the boat closer to the anchor. Okay, you can see that the wind's blowing us a little bit. I'm giving arm signals to steer more to the right. Can you see the white spray painted part of the rope coming up? That means I've got how much overboard? Red, white, blue. 50 feet is still overboard. So you can see the boat steering a little bit more to the right. I'm pulling in some slack, sliding it down into the hawser hole. And now I walk back and I pull the chain. On this design, I've got the chain, shackle, and thimble, so that will not feed through the anchor gypsy. I actually have to pull it back by hand and slap it into the gypsy, and then I work it down into the hawser hole or the chain pipe. And now you can hear the anchor windlass grunting and groaning as it's lifting the anchor up off the bottom. Now as I power up the chain, you can see the red come up on deck, and that means there's 25 feet of chain overboard. And that's important for the helmsman to know because in a very short time the anchor will be free. We're driving across the anchor to pop it up out of the bottom so it'll be easier to pull up on deck. Now as the anchor is being recovered, we want to bring it up to water level so we can rinse the mud off by forward motion. All signals forward, let's go. You can see the anchor's right at the water level. It's clear, and I'll pull it back up and put it into the anchor pulpit and nest it.
That was easy.
Yes, it really is. Plan ahead, plan where you want to anchor in the evening, get good charts, good cruising guides, figure out what you want to do 2 hours or so before dark, move into your anchorage, and settle in for the night. Yes, I did say 2 hours before dark. You want to be able to arrive, see what's going on, how many boats are in the anchorage. You want to have time to run your figure eight to scout out the bottom contours, and then set your anchor, back down, bury it, and then check your swing radius for tidal changes or wind changes to make sure you don't bump into any other boats during the night. On this boat, a 58-foot trawler, we're using a hydraulic windlass which has a horizontal shaft to pull up the anchor. You can also see there's a vertical capstan on the hydraulic windlass, so you've got three heads, a gypsy on the left, a gypsy on the right, and a capstan or a rope drum on top to pull up any rope anchor, which might be your secondary or backup anchor. You may have noticed the different chain colors coming up on the fourth gypsy: gold, blue, white, now red, only 25 feet left to go. Did you also notice he's got a saltwater hose to rinse the chain off, to get the mud off the chain before it comes up on deck? On this 52-foot boat, you can see they've recovered the anchor just about to water level, and they're going to idle forward to rinse the mud off of the anchor before pulling it up on deck. Again, they've got a seawater hose to rinse off the chain and the anchor. And now here I am, doing it the old-fashioned way. I've got a galvanized bucket full of water. You can see I'm rinsing the dirt or the mud off of the chain. The boat's moving forward slowly, a fast idle, and there's a little bit of skill to get that bucket full of water and not jerk it out of your hands. Of course, I'm wearing sandals, my feet are getting wet, and there goes the bucket again. Just keep on rinsing the deck. You may laugh at this, but when you live aboard and cruise for months at a time, this is pretty much the only exercise you get. Now I'm putting all the rope back into the bucket, and I'm going to store it back on the back deck. On this 47-foot trawler, you can see the big manhole to the right going down into the chain locker, and we're assuming there's 300 or more feet of chain, and you can see that stainless hasp to the left where there's the bitter end. The chain is tied by rope to the boat. On this 30-foot express cruiser, it has a chain to rope splice and about 200 feet of rope tied to the boat. So you can see the bitter end is a rope to the boat. You can cut it in an emergency if you have to. Let's say you buy a used boat and it's got 100% chain, or about 300 feet of chain in the chain locker forward, and that's what your chain looks like. The easiest thing you can do is to play out all of the good chain and cut it off at the first bad link, splice in a rope to chain splice, and then make it fast to the bitter end at the bottom of the chain locker and the rope locker. So now you've got a complete workable road, chain and rope road. Once you've got all of the splicing completed, then you would want to clean all the rust out of the bottom of the chain locker, find the drain hole and make sure that the drain hole is clear so the water can drain out of the chain locker, rope locker. Earlier we showed you a deck access into the chain locker, rope locker on the bow of a boat. This is a different style boat where the access to the rope locker is through the forward berth, through those two wooden doors. Upon opening the doors, you can see this boat's got a 100% chained road, and the chain is shackled directly to the anchor capstan. There is no emergency way to disconnect or cut the rope if you have to. On this sister ship, you can see there's a chain and rope road, and the bitter end is tied to the boat. This way, if you have an emergency and you have to cut and run, the bitter end will come up on deck and you can take your pocket knife and cut the bitter end, cut the rope. On this 53-foot boat, this is a great example of what we're talking about. We've got about 200 feet of chain overboard, and this is the bitter end. See the rope? If you need to cut and run, the rope is on deck, you can cut it. Back on deck, I'd like to point out the 2 foot controls to the left. That's your up and down power for the windlass. In this case, it's a capstan. To the left of the capstan, you can see the chain pipe, or if you've got a rope road, it would be called a hawse pipe. This is where your anchor road feeds through the deck into the locker below deck. Have any idea what this is? This is your clutch tool for your anchor windlass or your anchor capstan. You need to know how to adjust the clutch so that way you will not pop the circuit breaker if the anchor windlass gets jammed when your anchor is stuck in the bottom. Another piece of deck equipment is the chain brake or the chain stopper. Let's watch this in action.
So you see how the chain brake will catch it?
Oh, yes.
Okay, if it's not going to catch it, kick it with your foot.
Uh-huh.
Kick the chain brake down.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let out a little bit more chain. Okay, there you go. See how the chain brake caught?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Okay, so that's the value of the chain brake. So go ahead and pull it back up. Okay, put the chain brake in a safe open position so you can launch it by hand.
Okay.
Okay. Loosen that, and you might just do it with your hand, okay? Kick the chain to give it a little jerk. Okay, so that chain's going all the way down to the bottom. If you were trying to anchor out in the water instead of here at the marina, you would just back the boat up and it'd pull the rest of the chain out.
Oh,
And
I
then
see.
when you got to the end of the chain or the desired scope or distance, then you would either drop the chain brake or you would snug up the clutch on top of the capstan.
On this 48-foot trawler, you can see we've got a windlass with two chain gypsies, again, right and left, and then a capstan or a rope drum on top. This is an electric windlass, not a hydraulic windlass. Do you see the hand wheel on the left gypsy? This is the adjustment for the clutch control, no tool required. Looking forward on this dual system, I'd like to show you the Samson post to tie the anchor rope onto, and also the up and down foot controls. Take a look at the business end of this cruising boat. It's got a pulpit with two anchors mounted, one for sand, one for mud. If your bow only has room for one anchor, consider a multi-purpose anchor. A plow, good for hard sand bottoms, and a concave design, good for mud. Let's watch some of the deck equipment in use pulling the anchor in.
Okay, what's happening? Clutch is slipping.
Yep.
Okay, open the other flap and let it out. Just about 2 feet. Okay, and then bring it up and don't pause. Let's see if
Okay.
it'll flip over. Bring it up. Stop. Okay, what we need to do is go down again. Okay, stop. Grab your boat pole and flip the anchor around. It's
Oh.
trying to come up backwards, and I would recommend a swivel to put on there. We don't have a swivel on there.
Oh, okay.
Okay, don't step on those open.
Right.
Okay, it might take two people, one to hold the anchor the right direction and the other one to step on the pedals. Or can you do both? Okay, you just sold yourself a swivel.
And the swivel goes here, Chris?
Yes, it'll go right there where the shackles are.
Okay.
Here's a perfect example of how a good swivel will make your life easier when anchoring out. Watch it twirl and twirl and twirl and flip right side up and come into the nest. Let me show you two different types of swivels. I'd like to talk to you about this anchor swivel. We've got the anchor down here, the chain secured to the boat, and we have this swivel device to connect the chain to the anchor. Here we've got a shackle pin and another shackle pin, and here in the middle we have a swivel. See how the swivel works? To allow the anchor to swivel while it's overboard,
and also to allow the anchor to swivel when it goes back up into the anchor pulpit or the nest on the bow of the boat. Some things I'd like to point out on this type of a swivel is this shackle pin screws in, and it must be moused or seized with this seizing wire to prevent that pin from unscrewing. Same holds true for the top up here. Another shackle pin screws in, and then we've got the wire to seize that or to mouse it to prevent that shackle pin from coming out. And here in the center is the swivel. You can see the nut and the bolt system here and here, and that is the swiveling device for this type of anchor swivel connector. The good and the bad about this is this will swivel in a rotation, but it won't swivel with the wrist action back and forth or up and down. So this is pretty much a generic swivel, although it's in a stainless steel material. You can also buy these in a galvanized material.
This is a different type of swivel, actually my favorite. You can see it hinges up and down, and now the part that connects to the chain, you can see it's got a 360 rotation and also has some wrist action. So therefore you've got right, left, up and down, and then when you pull the anchor into the anchor pulpit, into the nest, it flips right side up every time. This trawler is anchored with a 100% chain rode, and then you can see two white ropes hooked to the anchor chain. This is called a bridle. It's actually a snubber or a shock absorber, so that when you have 100% chain connected to the boat, anytime you've got a lot of fierce wave action, you do not have those jolts from the anchor to the boat or to the windlass or capstan. The purpose of the bridle or the chain snubber is to give you a shock absorber and an easier, more comfortable night at anchor, and protect the drive shaft on the anchor windlass or capstan. You can see what's involved in using the bridle system of the anchor snubber. Here you can see the boat owner crawling, literally crawling out on the anchor pulpit to hook the chain hook onto the anchor chain, and you can see the rope, this port and the starboard side, coming back to the bow cleats. So this is not a whole lot of fun. Also, I'd like to point out this is an ordinary chain hook that if you've got a lot of slack in the anchor chain throughout the night, it may just fall off. A band-aid approach, and I'm really serious, I'm not joking, band-aid approach to prevent this simple ordinary chain hook from falling off the anchor chain is just to wrap it 1 or 2 times with duct tape to hold it in place when there's no strain on the anchor. This is a simple homemade snubber. The stretchy part, or the elastic part, is actually the white nylon 3-strand rope. You can see the chain hook at the bottom. You can see a thimble inside the splice or the eye splice of the rope to keep the chain hook from chafing the rope. And then you can see another shackle to go to the bow of the boat, or to a pulling eye on the bow of the boat. This is a simple design and it works okay. Now you can see me walking out onto the anchor pulpit with a simple single line anchor snubber. See the chain hook in the center of the screen? Now you can see I've got to get down on my knees, bend over, and place the chain hook on the anchor chain. Once that's secured in place, then I'll use the anchor windlass to let the chain out longer, the anchor chain out longer, and you can see the snubber is now drawing tight. The goal is to have the strain on the anchor snubber rope, not the strain on the anchor chain. You can see the anchor snubber is secured to the boat by the pulling eye down near the waterline instead of using the deck cleats up on the deck. By doing this, you can appreciate the lesser rode length that you would have to deploy for anchoring, because you're pulling from 1 or 2 feet above the waterline instead of 6, 7, or 8 feet above the waterline. This is a perfect example of a pulling eye on a 64-foot trawler. I'm 6 feet tall, standing on the ground. Look at the black water line on the hull. That's 6 feet. And then another 1 foot up to the anchor pulling eye. And then look a lot higher to the anchors, maybe 8 feet above water line. So anytime that you've got a pulling eye on a high bow trawler, you can reduce your rode length by a factor of 8 by having a pulling eye much closer to the water line. Look at these two simple chain hooks. The one on the right is a flat plate that's been cut out so it will slide onto a chain link on the anchor rode, and the one on the left is an ordinary hardware or 18-wheel truck type of chain hook. Again, it'll slide across a link on the chain. The advantage of these are they're simple, they're economical, they slide on easy, and the other part is they slide off easy. You can see this design is drastically different from the typical hardware store chain hooks. This is actually an anchor device built by an anchoring company called a chain grabber. You can see the circular part with the notch cut out. This actually goes over and around a chain link, and it will fit in place and it will stay in place until you purposely remove it. It will not fall off. Let's study this photograph. There's a lot going on. First, you can see the anchor pulling eye on the right, low to the water line, so you're reducing the amount of rode that's necessary for anchoring. Next, the snubber itself, not only is it a white nylon rope, but you also see that black rubber in the center. That's not an elastic rubber, but a compressible rubber. Gives you a little bit more shock absorption protection. And last, to the left, you can see the chain grabber that's actually grabbed around the link on the anchor chain, and as you were to use this properly, you would lower the chain and give slack into the chain, and all of the tension would be on the snubber rope itself. Now the proper way to use this, to hook it and to unhook it, is to raise the chain up on deck, pulling the anchor chain grabber up on deck, and you release the white rope. So you let the deck rope go down and the anchor chain come up till you can disconnect the chain grabber. The other way to hook it when you are anchoring is to do just the opposite. You'll put the chain grabber on the chain, lower the chain down, and pull the slack out of the rope and tie it onto the bow cleat on the deck of the boat. Now let's recover the anchor chain and the anchor snubber. This is the bow, a high bow boat, and you can see that the snubber or the rope is holding the chain. Now we're pulling the chain up, and as the chain comes up on deck, you can see the chain hook come up also.
I'm not seeing your hand that well.
The noise that you hear in the background is actually the bow thruster moving right and left. The chain hook's coming up. You'll see she'll reach over, grab the chain hook, disconnect it from the chain, and then secure it onto the anchor pulpit on the port side. This is the way they'll travel throughout the day until they anchor this evening. Watch this cruising boat as they come in to anchor near us. They've already come up, lowered the anchor, played out a lot of the rode. Now the anchor handler on the bow of the boat is preparing his snubber, putting it through the hawser hole on the bow of the boat, and he's got his chain hook, chain grabber in his hand. And now he's going to lean over, hook it onto the chain, and then back the boat up some more. Now he's letting out some more length on the snubber line, and then he will actually press the out button for the chain, and you can see the chain going out and the snubber line stretching. Now the chain line, the anchor chain is going straight down, And the snubber line now has the tension of the anchor. Watch as they back a little more. And you can see now the chain and the tension is on the snubber, and then the leftover chain is drooping. So therefore the boat is connected to the anchor on the seafloor by that white rope, that snubber line.
I'd like to introduce you to all of our personally owned anchors that we've used aboard our 44-foot trawlers we've cruised over the last 17 years. The first anchor is a 45-pound galvanized steel Danforth anchor. Next we have an antique North Hill anchor made of ductile iron. This is what seaplanes used to use. Now we have a Max MAX anchor. This is a mud anchor. Now we're showing a galvanized steel Delta anchor, which is a convex style plow anchor. And last we're showing the concave style Ultra anchor. This is a concave style that's good in both mud and sand. This is the Delta anchor. The Delta anchor has a solid shank. See, it's all in one piece, welded in right here. There's no swivel. You'll see a lot of other convex plow anchors may have a swivel right here, and in my opinion the swivel is not as advantageous as the solid shank is. I called this a convex plow anchor because this is very much like a farmer's plow. Pulling it behind a tractor or a mule in the old days, it would plow through the earth, and you could see it would turn the earth up and make a furrow where the farmer would then plant his seeds. So the advantage of this plow type anchor is the dagger point up here on the front, and looking underneath it you can see it's all filled with lead down here to make this heavier. So when you're using this anchor in a very hard bottom area like the Florida Keys, the Bahamas, and even South Florida, where you've got a lot of limestone and hard sand bottom, also known as hard pan. So you need the heavy point and you need the dagger point to actually dig into the seafloor bottom. Because of the solid shank, you can see that that's always pointed down. If you had a pivot device right here, a knuckle or a hinge, then it would point up because the shank would lay on the seafloor. But because you have the solid shank right here, the solid shank forces this point to point down into the seafloor, and as you drag it along, it will find a crack in the seafloor and it will dig into that crack, and then it will right itself, and then it will bury the anchor into the limestone or the hard pan or the sand in the Bahamas and in the Florida Keys. Just like any anchor, when you want to get the anchor back out, pull the anchor line vertical and it will just pop right up like this, and it will come out of the bottom easily enough. We also have a shackle on the back or the crown of the anchor, so we can use this as a trip line to pull it up backwards if it's stuck. And this anchor does nest very well in the anchor pulpit on the bow of your boat. It's designed to fit into most all anchor pulpits. It comes in very well, it'll stay very well, and it's easy to handle because you're using a windlass to lift it. So this is a convex, see the convex plane area of the plow anchor, and this is very good in sand and hard bottom areas. Not so good in slime or muddy bottom areas because this can act just like a hot knife cutting through butter. Butter being the mud or the slime, and this is the hot knife. So this is an excellent sand or hard bottom anchor. It's not my first choice for mud bottoms. So this is a Delta or a solid shank convex plow anchor. Okay, I'd like to introduce to you a folding fluke anchor. These are the flukes of the anchor, and then this is the shank that hinges back and forth. Actually, the shank stays still, and the flukes will hinge back and forth. Two popular brand names like this are the Danforth brand, which is usually a steel or a heavy metal, and then also the Fortress brand, which is a lightweight aluminum alloy anchor. This is a Danforth. This is an anchor that we own, that we've cruised with on our 44-foot trawler for years, and I'd like to show you the different features of these anchors. First of all, this is about a 45-pound anchor, so it's pretty heavy. I'm going to lay it over. You can see how it's hinging down, and you can see the hinges are up, and now they're laying down flush on the seafloor. And if you were to pull the shank up, if you're using about a 5 scope or a 7 scope, you can see how the blades would dig into the seafloor. Also, if you had a 10 scope or a very heavy chain rode on the anchor, you can see that the shank and both of the flukes would all be on the same plane, which may be a disadvantage when you're trying to reset after a tidal change where the boat changes direction 180 degrees. Other features on the folding fluke or the hinged fluke anchors, the Danforth and the Fortress style, is this big rectangular area here, which is called a mud palm, like the palm of your hand. The purpose of this mud palm is to force these flukes down into the seafloor or the bottom. So when your shank is up, this is forcing the flukes to point down and to grab and dig into the bottom. When your tide changes, your anchor may pop out of the bottom, so your boat will either float around to the side or it will float across the top, and as it floats across the top, the anchor will pop up out of the bottom of the seafloor, and listen to this. So you can hear it flip over, and then it will continue to flip over, and there you go, that's what happens. And then it will go down and it will pull in the opposite direction, and then these have to reset into the seafloor bottom. So that's called flipping or popping out of the anchor. Once the anchor is set into the seafloor and you want to pull it up out of the bottom to retrieve it to go on about your cruising for the next day, pull the rode in, pull the shank up, and when the boat is vertical above the anchor, then you can just lift it up like this, and you're only having to lift up about this 18 or 20 inches worth of fluke to pull it up out of the mud, and then you just pull the anchor straight up onto the boat. If you're not successful with that because the anchor might be stuck or buried too deep into the seafloor, you can also use a drill before you launch the anchor into the mud palms. You can drill a hole right here and then take a shackle, and by putting a shackle in here you can put a trip line. So this way, if the anchor's stuck in the mud, stuck in the seafloor, what you can then do by using the trip line, you can pull the anchor this direction and it will pull up out of the mud, and then you can flip it and pull it up to the anchor windlass on the bow pulpit. So this is the way a pivoting or folding fluke anchor works. The two more popular brand names that we see out there are Danforth brand, which is generally a heavy metal, or the aluminum alloy, which is a Fortress brand anchor. Keep in mind, if you have the Fortress brand anchor, you must install the mud palms. The Fortress anchor is an assembly model. That's one of the advantages of the Fortress anchor, is it disassembles and it can stow away very easily. But when you put it back together, make sure that you put the mud palms back in place. So this is a folding fluke Danforth Fortress style anchor. This is the Max anchor, M-A-X Max. It's a very strange, bizarre looking anchor. In fact, you can't even find this in a boat store. It's available for sale from the gentleman who makes these in Natchez, Mississippi. You can find the ads for these in the backs of magazines in the classified section, and you'll find these on a lot of the high bow cruising trawler boats like Katie Krogan's, Nordhavn's, Celine's. The advantage of the Max Anchor is it's got a very large scoop area. You can see how large this is. And Elise and I have had this anchor for years, and we refer to this as the backhoe. Just think of a big tractor working on the roads on the side, and they've got the backhoe that's digging up all of the mud. So you've got the big scoop area right here, this large square area that will hold into mud and clay. This has a solid shank, but this one is the adjustable shank model. You can barely see this hole up here. That's the top hole. This is the middle hole, and there's a third hole down here. So if you're cruising in a particular area, your home waters, you may want to adjust this shank angle up a little bit, right here where we have it, or down a little bit. And the purpose of the adjustable shank is so you can actually change the scope ratio to either a longer or a shorter scope ratio, depending upon the seafloor conditions and how crowded the anchorage is. Also want to point out here the nuts and bolts to put it together. These are stainless steel. You can see how shiny they are. It comes from the factory with a single nylock nut. Nylock, N-Y-L-O-C, is a nylon locking nut. I'm not comfortable with the nylock nut as my only means of securing the shank in place, so I actually bought a longer bolt, and I put a standard nut in place, and I backed it up with a nylock nut, so I've got the nylock nut jammed against the standard nut, so I'm locking those together, so this way I'm more comfortable knowing that they will not come unbolted when they're rattling around on the bow of the boat or after they're underwater in the seafloor. We've got this set on the average angle, which is the middle angle, and we've been happy with this anchor most of the time. I'm saying most of the time because I call this a mud anchor. You can see the big scoop, and the big scoop would be used in muddy situations. You can see the corners here have got some points, but they're not really razor sharp and they're not dagger pointed, but they do help dig into the seafloor. So we've got 2 outside points, 2 inside points, and then 2 more inside points. So that helps it bite and dig down into the seafloor. Another feature of this, you can put a shackle onto the back of the anchor or the crown of the anchor, and you can put a trip line here so you can actually pull it out backwards if it gets jammed, like it did for us for the hurricanes in the Florida Keys. Now, one thing that we've learned about this anchor is if you're using this in heavy clay or oyster beds, when you deploy this anchor off the bow of the boat, you want to let it sit for a full 1 or 2 minutes so it can settle down in through all of the clay. And then when you start to back the boat down, let out as much scope as you plan to, so that way you can actually dig the anchor down this direction into the bottom. We have experienced difficulty getting the Max to set in the neighborhood of the Florida-Georgia state line in Fernandina area above Jacksonville, Florida. It just would not set, so we had to go to a plow-type anchor, which had a dagger-type point that actually penetrated the seafloor easier. Other than that, I love the Max anchor. It's ugly, it's big, and it works well in the mud and the clay. Just have to be particular about getting it to set the first time. And mentioning that about setting the first time, when you change tidal directions and it flips out, you'll see the anchor will flip over, and when it lays down on its shank like this, you'll see it'll fall over, and then when you pull on it, or the current pulls the boat, you'll notice it'll start to pull itself right side up again. The concern there is if you've got a big ball of clay around this, will it reset? So these are our experiences that I just wanted to share with you so you would think about that. You would know what to expect when the anchor is down on the seafloor. So this is the Max, M-A-X, and you'll see this on a lot of high bow cruising trawlers. I want to introduce to you the North Hill anchor. The North Hill anchor was invented or designed back in the late 30s to use on the flying boats or the seaplanes that the U.S. Navy had, and also Pan American Airways that was using seaplanes. The purpose of the North Hill anchor is it folds flat, which is an advantage for seaplanes, but it's a disadvantage for boats. I'll show you how it works. We've got the two large flukes here and here. We've got the traditional shank where your shackle goes, and then we've got this folding stock. This is a lock finger here, and when you see I open and close that, this finger will lock onto that folding shank so that it will stow away in the seaplane very easily. I'm going to open this up, pull it straight up, and then I'm going to take this folding shank stock and slide it, and you'll hear a pretty loud noise. Here is a spring-loaded device that will lock into the crown of the anchor. And now that's the way that the anchor will sit on the deck of your boat or on the seaplane. This is a wonderful anchor for most cases once it's overboard from the boat. When it's on the boat, this is a monster to have to deal with because everything here will scratch and beat up your shins. It's a difficult anchor to manage, but once it's in the water, it's a good anchor. We use this as our hurricane anchor. I'll spin this around. Here you can see it's North Hill Company, Los Angeles, California. And you can see how we've got our fluke to hold on to the seafloor, and then this shank here and here, or stock, will keep it where these flukes are pointed down into the seafloor, just like that. Now the advantage and the disadvantage of this stock here is it will keep these pointed down into the seafloor, but a disadvantage is once this digs down this deep into the seafloor, this actually restricts the amount of movement that this can dig deeper into the seafloor. So this is good at this point, and it's not so good after this point because it actually prohibits the anchor from digging deeper into the seafloor. The way this anchor would work, when you deploy it off of your boat, it'll sit down on the bottom. Then when you pull it, it'll pull over, and you can see that this will sit on the seafloor with the chain going to the boat. This is a solid shank with the fluke digging in. This crossbar will help keep this digging in, and now you can see that it will dig into the seafloor. As you pull in reverse on your boat, this will dig deeper and deeper and deeper. But this cross piece right here, once the seafloor rises up to about this point, this will actually restrict the amount of depth that the fluke will dig into the seafloor. Like all other anchors, when it's time to pick the anchor up out of the water, pull your boat forward, pull your rode up until you have a vertical rode, and then you just pull this straight up, and then the anchor just hauls straight back up to the windlass. So most of the time it's that easy. I do want to say that we lived in the Florida Keys for the years 2004 and 2005. We lived in Marathon in Boot Key Harbor, and during those two summer seasons, or the hurricane seasons, we had so many hurricanes we were having to go back into Sisters Creek and Whiskey Creek so that we could tie our boat into the mangrove root system and deploy our anchors into the bottom. The year 2005 Hurricane Wilma, we were not in the eye, but we did have a wind direction change where we were having winds from the southeast for half of the hurricane and from the northwest for the other half of the hurricane. And when it was time for us to pull the anchors up out of the seafloor, this thing was gone. It was totally buried under the seafloor, as well as the other 3 anchors that we had deployed. We had 4 anchors overboard and they were all buried. So I had to get a scuba tank and go down there and pull them up out of the mud. But this is a good anchor as far as storm anchors are concerned. It's not a friendly anchor as far as stowing it aboard your boat or as far as pulling it up into an anchor pulpit. There's just nowhere to put this monster, but it's a good hurricane anchor, and we like it for that reason. To fold it up, let me spin this around. I've got to get this to slide back, so I'll turn it up like that. I'll use my multi-tool, and I'll push on this piece here. And again, it's not that easy to do. Okay, I got it. Push it across and pull it back up. And then here you can see there's a finger. And well, we'll have to trust that it works because I've got to fight it with a little bit of a hammer to get it in there. But this is a North Hill anchor. They're no longer in production. They're hard to find. You might even call this an antique anchor, but you don't see them on many cruising boats just for all of the difficulty you've seen me working with it. They're not friendly. They're not easy to use. But come a hurricane, they're a nice anchor to have for a hurricane. This is another plow style anchor, a little bit different from the last anchor, which was a convex anchor. This is a concave anchor. You can see the bottom of the plow right here is concave. Actually works like a scoop to scoop into the mud. This is an ultra style. This is an ultra brand anchor, weighs 46 pounds. The convex anchor I showed you was a Delta style that was 45 pounds. So that makes both of these equal anchors. On this anchor, we also have the point. It's pointed down or it's curved down so it'll dig easier into the seafloor. It has the solid shank right here, so there's no knuckle like some other brands have knuckles. There's no hole in the back that's required to put a shackle in for a trip line. We've got this bar back here. You can just tie a trip line in with a bowline knot instead of having to use a shackle. We've got these edges here to help turn it down. This turns it down and it will dig into the seafloor. When you use the anchor, like all anchors, you want to scope it out, and then as you drag it into the seafloor, you can see that this will help go down. This would be good in hard bottoms like the Bahamas and the Florida Keys, and this concave style right here would be good in muddy bottoms like northern Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, even the Chesapeake. So that would give you a good multi-purpose function for this anchor. To retrieve the anchor after it's been buried into the seafloor, just like all the other anchors, you would pull the scope up until you have a vertical scope, and then you would just pull the anchor upright, like I'm doing here. And you see how the anchor will just pull and then just go straight up to the boat. The reason this anchor still has the chain on it and the other anchors don't have chains on them is I just took this off the bow of our 44-foot trawler so I could demonstrate this to you today. I did not want to take the chain out because this lock pin right here is secured by using Loctite glue, which is a particular strength of Loctite material, so that will not vibrate and unscrew itself. Talking about that, I wanted to show you the swivel that we have on this. This is also an ultra type swivel, and you can see you've got your up and down motion here, and then this saddle will align this anchor to come back into your anchor pulpit, and then here at the tip of my finger is a finger or an eccentric point on the ball roller on the front of this swivel, so that way it'll guarantee that it'll come straight right side up into the anchor pulpit on your boat. We call that nesting. So when you pull the anchor into the nest, it comes in at the proper angle and the proper direction. show you a few more things about this. Because of the solid shank, when it lays over on the seafloor, you can see we've got this touching the seafloor and the point touching the seafloor. I'll turn it over the other direction so you can get a better view. Again, this is on the seafloor and that's on the seafloor. So you can see how the solid shank is forcing this point to penetrate into the seafloor. Once it goes in, it will right itself and then it will bury itself under the seafloor, and the harder you pull or the stronger the currents or the stronger the winds, the deeper this goes. If you have a tidal change, if you're sleeping overnight and you've got a tidal change, naturally the boat will go from over to my far right, it will swing around to my far left, and this anchor, like all other anchors, will pivot or pop out of the seafloor when that tidal change occurs. So I'm going to wrestle this anchor over and show you what happens when you have a tidal change and it goes the other direction. Say it pops out. And I'm just going to drop it and watch what happens. So you see again, this solid shank forced the point to go back down into the seafloor, so it will reset instantly. So this is a good multi-purpose anchor because it does have the point, it's got the leaded front of the anchor, and it has a solid shank. So all of these features make this a more desirable anchor if you only have area on the bow of your boat for one anchor. Our boat's an older boat. It only has one anchor pulpit and one bow roller. Some newer boats will have much larger anchor pulpits and it'll have two bow rollers. So if you start looking at cruising boats, and you'll see they've got two anchors on the bow of the boat, many times they've got two different anchors. One may be a plow style anchor and one may be a mud style anchor. So you might see something like a plow anchor and a Bruce anchor, or a Max anchor and a plow anchor. So that way when you're cruising from the northern climes, Maine, Narragansett Bay, Cape Cod, Chesapeake Bay, all the way down through the intercoastal waterway to South Florida, the Keys, and the Bahamas, depending upon the seafloor conditions, you can change. You can use the mud anchor or you can use the sand anchor. On our boat, we only have one anchor roller on the bow pulpit, and we choose to use this anchor primarily because it does both functions very well for us.
Thank you for joining us for this episode, Anchoring. We've given you a lot of tools to make you more confident and more comfortable while anchoring your cruising boat out overnight. We've talked about different anchor styles, different deck equipment, different cruising guides to help you select a safe anchorage over the night, and we have also shown you how to recover the anchor the next morning. Remember, if you have any questions, call us. Ask Captain Chris. okay, and put the safety on it, we're done.